One of my fondest memories when growing up was listening to the stories my grandfather used to tell me about the time he spent in Southeast Asia. That was a long time ago now when I used to listen to those stories, and even longer when my grandfather was there. But I would like to thank him for giving me that sense of wonder and that sense that the world is a lot bigger than it appears to be on the surface. My grandfather worked in Burma, lifetimes ago now, and he always used to refer to it as his happy place. Granted, times were very different back then. He was working there as part of the administrative system. No chance of doing anything like that today, but he was also involved with things in Thailand too. Of course, in Thailand, things were different. Thailand was its own unique and sovereign country, and that was one of the things my grandfather pointed to as being the best thing about Thailand. While my grandfather worked for the colonial administration, he just worked for it. He was indifferent to what had him being in that position in the first place, and actually really respected Thailand for their stance and ability to stay free. Half of the stories he used to tell me, I wasn't sure if he was making them up. There's no way a country can be like that. No way things can be like that. But every time he sniggered a bit at something he said that I thought was a fabrication, he would stop regaling the story and look at me dead in the eye and say, "This is exactly as it happened." When you were a boy of 10 years old, perhaps this would have been something that you never envisaged. You were trying to picture and imagine everything that your grandfather was telling you, but your imagination didn't go that far because you had no point of reference and nothing to compare it to. You would allow your imagination to run wild and picture things how you did, but it was so different to reality. One thing that my grandfather did instill in me was a love of experiences, a love of adventure, and a love of going out of your comfort zone and finding your own place in the world. I knew from a very early age that I would have to go and see that part of the world for myself. And when I was listening to these stories, this was a long time ago, and going places like that was extremely uncommon in comparison to how it is today. But I felt like I would just be following in the footsteps of my grandfather, and I would make it happen however I could. I turned 20 in 1973. I was still at university then, wishing I was anywhere else, but I knew there wasn't very long to go until I could be on my own and out in the world, seeking my own path. I did have some spare time available to me around halfway through that year, a few months, in fact, so I decided I would go to Thailand because it was just always there ever since I heard those stories. I guess I couldn't have picked a worse time to go. October of that year, there were lots of protests and violent crackdowns taking place in Bangkok, and I was there at the time. It was a very unique experience to behold. I was there before that as well, and I just felt like that part of the world was alive. I mean, it really was alive. Everything felt possible, everything felt within grasp. For another 20-year-old guy, it was a place where I tried to convince myself I would spend my life. I left in November of that year, having been through all those protests and things. In fact, feeling an even bigger draw to Thailand because of it. It was like things were happening, there was change in the air, but I suppose we all know how that went. I returned home, finished university, and was just hankering to go back to that part of the world to work and to establish myself. But I guess, as is the case for many people, life just got in the way. I got a good job offer, so I had to take that up. And after I'd been doing that for 6 months, I was out one evening and I ran into someone who would become my future wife. It's amazing how all those childhood dreams you had, those experiences I had in Thailand as a 20-year-old, how this was first and foremost what I was interested in doing. It was like, I'm not doing what I want to do, I'm just falling into the kind of pattern that everybody seemed to be doing. And if I think back to that time, I don't necessarily remember myself being extremely happy about what I was doing. I think I must have been in love, but I don't think I had the same sense of excitement that I had when I was in Thailand. Why I didn't push forward with my dreams even harder, why I didn't take a step back and tell myself not to do these things because life is going to pass me by, I don't know, but I did. And Thailand would leave my mind completely for the next very long time. I would like to say that I wasn't miserable or unhappy doing the things I was doing, but if I think back to that moment of my life, the standout moment, the thing I think about that sends shivers down my spine, but the stories I heard from my grandfather, the time I spent in Thailand, and the thoughts I had at that time of somehow establishing myself and not following in the footsteps of my grandfather because he was from a different world entirely, but maybe being a bridge between the worlds, building something out there. And if I had built something from that time, I know I would be extremely wealthy now. I can remember, and this is hard to talk about for somebody in a position like me today, throughout all the things that have happened to me, but I can remember finding out about this small piece of land right in the heart of Bangkok, right in Sukhumvit. I remember that being for sale and being interested about it and wanting to find out how much. I could have probably scraped together enough money to buy it. Okay, I wasn't Thai, I couldn't have owned it, but thinking about that fact and the land around that part of Bangkok now selling for billions with a B, bad, it does make you think all those thoughts and feelings you were having at the time were real. The expectations you had about the trajectory of Thailand was real, and you just completely missed the opportunity. 20 years went by. That was my life all over again. And after that, it was like when I went to Thailand, I was closer to the point in time when I didn't even exist. That was me closer to being to Thailand than I was at that moment in time. And I wasn't really thinking about Thailand. That would come later. But what I'm trying to get at is that Thailand was a lifetime away. That was quite a bad year though, 1993. My wife had cheated on me, and I found out that she'd been doing this for around 6 years, and the guy she was cheating on me with was doing the same to his wife. It was a very upsetting part of my life. I guess the thing that kept me going was that because she seemed to care so much about the other guy, my kids actually came to live with me, which was fortunate because they were the most important thing for me. At that moment, my youngest was 14, and I was just busy working, making sure I could put them through school. I paid for private school for them, and also made sure that if they wanted to go to university, I could pay for that. So, that was what I gave the next 4 years of my life to. 1997, that was when my youngest finished school and went to university, which was a weird experience when you've had kids living with you for nearly 2 decades and then they're not there anymore. The house feels so empty, you feel alone, you feel like you don't have a purpose, and you're kind of looking for that release. You want to say to yourself, good job with what you've done, bad luck with your wife, but now it's your turn to think about yourself for a change. I would have been 44 in 1997, and of course we had the financial crisis in Asia at the time, and when I was watching the news about it, that's when I started thinking about Thailand again for the first time for such a long time. All of a sudden, I had this urge to go back to Thailand and have another look, to see how it's come on since I was there last, which was a long time ago, and it didn't take me a lot of convincing myself to just take some time for myself at the end of 1997 to go. 44 years old, in the previous years dedicated purely to my kids. I made sure that they were okay financially, even though that was at my own expense, but I didn't care. I never understood the parents who wanted their kids to go out and work for themselves. I'm talking about people who had money. If I had money, my kids had money. Life is for living, you only have one life, so there's no way I'm going to be stingy and let my kids struggle while I had a blast. I guess when I get to the crux of things, that mentality that I had was just how I was and who I was. And perhaps, though, that made me make the mistakes I made later on. I always put my kids first, though, and I would do that again, as I suppose would most parents. Putting that aside, when I made it to Thailand around the end of 1997, I just felt great again. It's not like I'd been miserable throughout my life, but I remember what Thailand gave me when I went first. All that amazement and all that wonder, and also, because of the crisis that had just taken place, the Thai currency had depreciated in value considerably. Things weren't catching up price-wise yet, and you just went there and you couldn't believe how affordable things were if you were coming from the outside. I did feel bad for many of the locals and many of the businesses that went under. We still had that building, the Ghost Tower, which is a reminder of that time. But coming from the outside, I found that point in time to be one of the best times I've ever had in my life. Before I go further, I want to say when I'm referring to the best time of my life, when I'm referring to the happiest I've ever been, because happiness comes and goes, I'm referring to it as when I'm by myself. I'm not referring to it as the time I spent with my kids. That's very important, because when I listen to a story, I often wonder, are those guys saying that the time they spent in the bar was better than the time they spent with their kids? That definitely wasn't the case for me. Definitely not. So I just want to let you know. It was an interesting experience when I left Thailand that time. I didn't really want to leave. Again, I had to look around at the different things you could buy there, how much things cost, and thinking back to the time when I went first, just how much more expensive things were then. That made me think I should have done what I wanted to do. Imagine what life would have been like now. It would be very difficult to have been in Thailand in 1997 and thought toward 2026 and imagine Thailand being as it is today. I would never have thought Thailand would be where it is today, and I guess if I'd have known it would have been where it is today, I wouldn't have made it my life's mission when I returned home to move to Thailand at some point. What I mean by that is, what I was attracted to about Thailand was what I saw when I was there, on the ground in 1997, and the time I was there before. That was the Thailand that I was interested in. Nothing like the West, very Asian, very different to modern Thailand, but we don't know what the future holds, and I would never have guessed that the future held what it did for Thailand. Because while I'm not there now, when I see videos about the place, it just doesn't look like a modern Asian city. It doesn't scream Bangkok. If you saw drone footage of Bangkok, you wouldn't think Bangkok unless you recognize the buildings. Whereas if drones existed in 1997 and you saw a drone shot of Bangkok, you would see it, and within 2 seconds you would be able to identify which city it was, because it wasn't just a generic copy of all the other cities building all the same kind of high-rise buildings in the same way. I think it's a sad state of affairs, but it's their country to develop as they please. If they want to do things like that, they're more than free to do so, but I prefer the old, always have and always will. Now, if only we had a time machine and could go back to witness the country when my grandfather was there, that would be my dream, but that's not reality. I've always been a dreamer though, so you have to give me that. When I returned home in 97, I was returning home thinking about somehow getting myself to Thailand to live. I loved it there, and I wanted to be there. But as soon as you're back, you go back to work, you settle back into your life, and the thoughts you're having to move to Thailand fizzle away. They're still there, but more pressing concerns take precedent, and I kind of just put everything I had on the back burner and got on with my life. In 2000, I paid off the mortgage on my house after the divorce. In 2005, I completed on a rental property, and in 2010, I completed on a second rental property. And I took stock of my life at that moment and thought, I have enough money to retire now. I have enough money to do what I want. What I want is to do something different. I was 57 in 2010. I did think it was now time to start the path of retirement. My 2 rental properties were only small, but they brought me in around £1,200 a month for both of them, and my main house, which I lived in, if I chose to rent that out, that should add another £800 to that. Total £2,000 a month, and I thought I was going to leave work, and I decided I was going to go to Thailand to check it out again, 13 years since being there last. It was quite upsetting to see how the exchange rate had got worse since I was there last, when it was quite alarming to see how far Bangkok had come on in the 13 years since I was there last too. It was like a different world. I still loved it though, I still loved Thailand, and it was quite clear that if I wanted to live in Thailand, I had more than enough money to do so. In fact, enough money to have a great time. And that was what I thought about when I spent a month there in 2010. While before, I'd only ever been to Bangkok. During that month, I decided to travel to more places because I was starting to think, if Bangkok can change so much every time I come back, if I make it another 20 years, what's it going to be like then? I wasn't loving the modern Bangkok compared to the old Bangkok, and that's why I went to Pattaya. Immediately, I didn't like it. It wasn't my vibe. I didn't really like Phuket either. That was meant to be a very popular place, but I just didn't get it. I liked it in Chiang Mai, but it felt a bit too removed from the rest of the country for me, and I just found myself going back to Bangkok for the last week of that month, thinking, it's not that bad, it's just not how I remembered it. I then also had to tell myself, remember when you went there for the first time, you were younger. When you went for the second time, you were still younger too. Now you're older, so genuinely your opinions can change when you're older. I just had to convince myself that Bangkok was a great city, and if I was going to live anywhere, that's the city that gave me much happiness throughout the years. It might just be memories at the time, yet I could live there. When I returned home, it was my plan to spend some time at home, just thinking about things, coming to the right decision. understanding if it is the right thing to move halfway around the world to retire. And again, instead of thinking about things quickly, I'm just living and existing and thinking about things. But I'm doing it at a very slow pace. It was 2012 when I decided I was going to move to Thailand. 59 years old, 2 years had passed since I was there last, but it got to the point when I had to tell myself if I don't go now, I never will. It was at the end of 2012 when I got a retirement visa stamped in my passport, a one-way ticket, and flew to Thailand. I had 3 houses I was renting out. I only left when my main house was rented. I spent time at one of my kids' places until that was rented, so I had the income coming in. I did have emergency money as well, for a number of eventualities, but the bulk of what I had was in my houses, and it was giving me around £2,000 a month. It was so exciting to be moving to Thailand. It was very different feeling to the times that I had in the past, and I guess I wasn't really that knowledgeable about Thailand if I think about it, although I thought I was. I thought, because I'd been 3 times in the past, in very different parts of history, very different parts of the country's history that is, that I was someone who knew Thailand like the back of my hand. The thing is, I didn't. I just felt like I did, because I felt like I had a shared history with the country. One very important thing to say is, the first time I was in Thailand, I did meet a girl. Nothing serious happened, but I still think about her to this day. Second time when I was there, the same thing happened, and I still think about her to this day. And I guess the third time, the same thing happened too. I had a bit of a weakness for the girls in Thailand, and while at home, I would never in a million years have gone into an establishment like that. In Thailand, it was just a done thing, what you did, and it was a weakness I had. I rented a condo on Sukhumvit Soi 13, pretty much right next door to the hotel I stayed at when I was there last, and the hotel I stayed at in '97 as well. I was in two minds about Bangkok, but at that time, it was still the Asian Bangkok. It was still that Thailand Bangkok in 2012. It still had some semblance of how it felt back in 1997, and to me, that was the part of the city that you just lived in. I know times have changed now. Many people move further up the BTS line. The BTS wasn't even there in 1997. But you get people living all over the city now, as has always been the case. But it was kind of like in 1997, the vast majority of expats who lived there, I mean, most of them that is, all seemed to live around that particular part of the city. Because I had those experiences, I guess, that's just where I felt like I had to be as an expat. It was where I was meant to be. £2,000 a month in 2012 was still enough to live in Bangkok, in that part of Bangkok. And that's very important to say, because there came a time when that wasn't enough money to live in Bangkok, at least have the same kind of lifestyle, and it's scary to admit to right now, but I didn't know just how quickly Bangkok would move away from the Bangkok I fell in love with, towards this cosmopolitan, globalized, modern version of the city, so far removed from what I expected it to remain in my lifetime. Why that's very important, because you start to think about other things, making other decisions to try to change and get back those feelings you have, where your £2,000 a month is enough to say to yourself, if I want to go out tonight and I want to do this, I can. If you say, I can't do that on £2,000 a month anymore in Bangkok, then Bangkok isn't the city for me anymore, because that's what Bangkok was for. I suppose I will get there very soon. Throughout 2012 and pretty much the entirety of 2013 as well, I had my 60th birthday in 2013, but I was living in that same condo that I rented, and my life was great. I met one girl, but things didn't get further than just a month spent together, seeing how things would go. But I was mainly keeping myself to myself, enjoying my time in Bangkok, and very grateful that I was finally in Bangkok after all those years of waiting, and I just thought that's where I would spend the rest of my life. In 2014, I actually met another girl, brand new to one of the bars that I liked to go to, and as soon as I saw her, I felt something for her. I was 60 and she was only 24, but that was just Thailand. When you've spent time in Thailand, your first time being there lifetimes ago, and you witness this sort of thing pretty much every single time you're there, it doesn't feel strange or abnormal like it would feel at home. At home, you wouldn't even have thought about doing something like that. Of course you wouldn't. But in Thailand, it was acceptable. It was normal, and that's what you were meant to do. I actually had her move into my place. That was very serious for me, if I was doing that. I never even thought about having someone move into my place before, and she actually lived with me for 3 months. That came to an end, unfortunately, after I found out that she was hiding some things from me which she didn't tell me about originally. And because of that, I felt quite upset because I had strong feelings for her. But I wasn't about to continue doing things with somebody and spending time with them and supporting them if they weren't exactly who I thought they were. What that meant, though, I'm single again in 2014, and I'm noticing that lots of the places that I like to go to have put their prices up. Not substantially, but enough whereby, instead of being able to go out every single day, now I can only go out 6 days a week. And when you go out normally, it's just to eat a normal meal and have a few drinks. I'm not going crazy here when I want to go out, but it's a very shocking realization. That little increase in price, which felt that it was too much of an increase in the space of the time I'd been there, I didn't expect that to happen for a very long time. But between the spaces of moving there in 2012 to 2014, what I had wasn't enough to go out with every day anymore. Now it's only 6 days a week. It was okay though, I was getting older, but I did like my evenings. I didn't drink every day, maybe twice a week, but that to me was what I looked forward to in the day. I looked forward to heading out around 5 p.m. and returning around 9 or 10. A nice meal, not Thai food because I had Thai food at lunch. And when I'm noticing that what I have isn't enough for that anymore, it didn't concern me too much because it was only 1 day less a week. But from there, it was very rapid how much more expensive things became, and it was very disheartening because that's not what Thailand was meant to be. I met a girl in 2015, and although she moved in with me for a few months, I found something out about her, so that relationship ended. And as I'm writing this now, I wish I could somehow change the story after this one and just give up entirely and think to myself, this isn't going to work for me. But I didn't do that. In 2015, a few of my favourite places closed down, and a few months later, something else opens, and it's one of those places that not only charges more than the old places, but they've got extra VAT and service charge on top. So before, where I could go out and have a slap-up meal when I first arrived for 500 baht, maybe with one drink, I'm talking about a really nice meal, not Thai food as I said, but that same thing now could be 750 in the space of such a short amount of time, and it was soul destroying because all those years I wasn't in Thailand, taking advantage of the affordability, now I was there, and I felt Bangkok was just slipping away from me at an alarming speed. I noticed the same in 2016 as well, and 2016 was the time I told myself that this is unsustainable. I can continue to live here, yet I'm not living the same kind of life I thought I would be living because Bangkok is simply not the same city. If I left Bangkok in 2016, I could go somewhere and have a better time. That's what I thought. It would be a fateful decision, because that would be what caused me the problems I had. But I was quite hurt that it was allowed to go so far away from the city that I thought it was meant to be. These are just my opinions here, but I thought that's what Bangkok was. So I left in 2016. Pattaya was off the cards for me because I didn't like it, as was Phuket. I had been back to Phuket a few times just on holiday, but I didn't want to live there, so I found myself going to Chiang Mai. Originally, I thought it was a bit too far away from everything if you wanted to go anywhere other than northern Thailand. When I was there in 2016, though, I felt that it was still closer to the original Thailand than any of the other cities that were popular with tourists and expats. It's very important for me to live somewhere that was popular with tourists and expats, because if there weren't many people like that there, you wouldn't be able to get as much Western food as easily, and that was my favourite cuisine. Chiang Mai was kind of like making the best of a bad situation for me in Thailand around 2016. My money, £2,000 a month. I actually had someone else move into my house, so I was getting £2,050 a month all in, but in 2016 in Chiang Mai that was enough. I want to keep talking about this because if anyone's thinking about moving to Thailand, I was alarmed at just how much Bangkok had come along. If you think in 2016, £2,050 though in Chiang Mai, I guess that was the equivalent of having 3,200 in Bangkok. You could do the same kind of things in the same kind of areas, same kind of restaurants, and exist in the same way. When I was in Thailand originally, that gap was a lot smaller, so Chiang Mai to me was the best of a bad situation. I'd only been in Chiang Mai for a month, and I'd found all the places to go where you could go for a beer and you could go and speak to the girls. It was only a very small part of the city where things like that was available, But I had a place that I rented close by, so I was within walking distance of everywhere I wanted to be. It was quite an old condominium building where I lived, but it was only £200 a month, and I could walk 5 minutes to the street with all the bars on it. And also, they had great restaurants around there. It felt to me just like a smaller version of the old Bangkok. That would be my accurate take. But I met a girl in one of the bars on Loy Craw Road. She wasn't like any girl I'd ever seen in Thailand before. One thing I did find, if you're in Bangkok, most of the girls that seem to work in the bars are usually from the northeast of Thailand, and can often be the case in Chiang Mai. But in Chiang Mai, you'll get girls working there from the north of Thailand. Some of them come from Chiang Mai and the surrounding provinces, and this girl came from about half an hour away from the city, and she just blew me away. I felt like moving to Chiang Mai was the best thing I did in that moment. She was called Minnie, bleached blonde hair, nearly right to the bottom of her back. She had tattoos, and I found that quite attractive, and she even had a lip piercing, which was something I was never attracted to before, but there was something about how she looked that was mesmerizing for me. It was like, when I saw her, I just had to have her. It was like everything that went wrong in Bangkok in terms of how despicable that city became in such a short amount of time. It was like all worth it now, because I had just met this amazing girl. One thing which should have stopped me in my tracks, though, it should have stopped me dead in my tracks, was actually when I met her, maybe the fourth time, and this time I'm actually really liking her. But she asked me if I wanted to go back to her place, and I thought there's no harm in that. When I did go back to her place, it was only a very small studio apartment with no air conditioning, but she had a metal spoon, which is not abnormal in itself. But you could tell that this metal spoon was used in a certain way to do a certain thing, and you know in Thailand they have that really bad drug? Well, she was clearly partaking in this. When I asked her about it, she just said, "Only occasionally, I don't do it often." I just thought, never mind. I thought I'll overlook this because she made me feel amazing. 22 years old, granted a lot younger than I was, but again, this was Thailand, and you're allowed to do this in Thailand. It's normal in Thailand, so there's no problem. By the end of 2016, we were married, and I shudder as I'm thinking about this now, because that was insane, but we were. We were married. I hadn't known her long. I'd ripped up all the rules that I had when it came to meeting girls and everything I did, and I just completely dove headfirst into the feelings that I got when I was with her, regardless of the fact that I noticed during the time we spent together that she hadn't given up that particular substance. I just didn't seem to care. It was like I'd taken leave of my senses, because I just felt like this girl was everything and nothing else mattered. Imagine being in your 60s, getting married to a girl in her 20s, thinking that she loved you. But I did. I thought she loved me. Perhaps I was just smitten. There's no point trying to justify anything here, is there? Because I loved her unconditionally. And when 2017 rolled round, it was like everything she asked for, I just did it without thinking, even though that's stupid. We were still living in that same condo which I was renting, and she said the problem with living here was she could go and see her friends very easily. She was going out often. I was going out with her most of the time, but I was starting to feel like going out all the time was taking its toll on me. But she said I'm always seeing friends and I can't get out of this lifestyle in terms of what she was doing and those negative things I mentioned, and I actually understood what she was saying. She said perhaps if we were to leave this part of the city, so close to everything, and move to the outskirts, then we could be disconnected from all the party atmosphere and the party lifestyle that happens around there. That should help her calm down. It should also help us bond better because I felt like we were bonding well, but still had some way to go. Around the start of 2017, then, we spent time looking around Chiang Mai, the adjoining districts, and it was amazing that you could get these really nice houses for not much money at all in terms of rent. We went to one housing development to look at a house for rent, and we looked inside and liked it, and we thought this would be added to the list of other places we'd already looked at. But as we were leaving, the sales office was there. They hadn't sold all the houses yet in that development, so we went for a look. It was my idea. Let's go in and have a look and see what's available in terms of the houses to buy. I wasn't thinking I was actually going to buy one, because I just wanted to know out of interest, like I had so many times before, so we walked in. 4 months later, one of those houses we looked at now belonged to my wife. I'd sold one of my investment properties at home to pay for it, and I know it was stupid and I regretted it almost as soon as I did it, but it was a really nice house and my wife was really happy, and it felt like we had our forever home. I felt like we would always have somewhere to live that would be ours. I would always be okay being in this place, and I was pretty much in my element. It was clear that because my income had reduced, we couldn't go out and do things as much, but we weren't living in that area anyway, so we didn't need to. I was okay with that, because I had my wife with me all the time, and she was like my dream. A few months after we moved in, it was my wife's birthday, so she asked if we could throw a party and get all her friends to come. That was fine with me. It sounded like it was going to be a good idea, so lots of her friends from the bar she used to work at came, as well as some other friends. And I'm very out of place because I'm in my 60s and all these 20-year-olds are in the house, celebrating, and then the substances appear, and it terrifies me, because in Thailand, you don't want to be involved with anything like that. I was really angry. My wife, who perhaps was already under the influence, was angry with me because I was angry. So she said, "We're going to go and have the party somewhere else." About 5 minutes after shouting at my wife in front of a few of her friends, which I think I was within my rights to do, she left with everybody else to go wherever they were going to go. I was just sat there thinking, that wasn't very good. My wife came back the following morning and we just didn't talk about it. But it was quite a shocking thing because we had this house together, and up until then, she had been clean. But it was like her old ways were coming back again, and even still, I could have probably escaped, not unscathed, because I would have taken a huge hit. But why I didn't take a step back and think I'm 40 years older than her, this is insane, I don't know. But I didn't. I just forgave her and said let's move ahead. I really loved her. It was unconditional love. That's the problem. And after that time, it did seem like she was settling down again, until I found out, not that long later, maybe only a week, that she'd never actually stopped, and she was just hiding it very well. When I was asleep, she'd sneak out of the house. If I went out to see a friend, she would be out. And it wasn't like I think she was cheating on me. I don't think that was the case. But she was just addicted, and she managed to hide it so well for such a long time until one day I woke up at night and she wasn't there next to me. I was usually a very heavy sleeper. I took medication to assist me to sleep ever since I had difficulties. But I woke up that night and she wasn't there. I walked downstairs and she was blacked out on the sofa, and it was clear what was going on. Again, it was because I loved her so much that I thought I needed to help her. I need to try and move her past this. She needs to stop. So I paid for her to go and seek help, which was a big chunk of my emergency money. I thought things were looking better when we were quite close to the end of 2017, but I'd never experienced this in my life before. I'd never known anybody who was addicted like this, and it was quite alarming because it was her whole existence. How I couldn't pick up on it before, though, for such a long time, I don't know. Probably I'm just a naive old fool. Maybe that's what it is. The biggest problem, though, was I've used a lot of my emergency money for her to seek help at the end of 2017. It did appear that she was now clean, which was great, but she wasn't the same then anymore. It was like now she was clean, she looked at me like, why did I marry him? And then I found out about the debts. Up until then, we'd been living in this place, this new place that belonged to my wife. I didn't know she had debts. We got a knock at the door one day. I went to open it and there were two guys there. One of them spoke a bit of English, asking for my wife, and I didn't know who they were, so I said, "My wife's here." I told my wife to come over, and the look on her face was like she'd seen a ghost. I asked what was going on, and the guy who spoke a bit of English said she owes 1 million baht. I nearly had a heart attack. 1 million baht? What was that for? And apparently, well, she'd been getting into debt to buy things. I told these people to leave, which they did, but before leaving they said that this needs to be sorted out and they'll be back. And when I confronted my wife about this, she said she's been borrowing money for a long time and she used to pay it back, but she hasn't paid it back for 6 months. Now, it's added up and added up even more, and she's got to pay it. I asked her why she didn't tell me, why did she hide it from me, and she just said she was too shy to talk about it. I didn't have anywhere near enough money to be able to just give her this money, and my emergency money was already short because I paid for her to go and seek help. But it was clear that if this wasn't paid, she was going to have problems. The first thing I said was when I found out that the interest rates were so high, can't you just go to the police and say these people are charging illegal interest rates? Why can't you do that? She just said it doesn't work like that. Maybe on the surface it appears like you should be able to do that, but these need to be paid. What did this idiot do? Me, that is. In that moment, I just felt so proud of her that she wasn't partaking anymore. So fortunate that I had her with me that I thought I needed to pay this. I had a credit card that I used every time I made online purchases. I had a big credit limit on it because I've had it for such a long time and I've always paid it off. So I just decided the best thing to do would be to clear this debt for her. Might be a lot of money, perhaps it's going to take a long time to pay back the credit card, but if I don't do this, it's not going to be good for both of us. So I took out a huge cash advance on this credit card and covered the debt for her. I didn't know that I was on a very slippery slope from that moment, because when it was clear that the money I had coming in every month wasn't enough to live our lifestyle anymore, bearing in mind that I sold one of my houses to buy this house we were living in, and I just wanted to clear the debt that I had, I felt it wasn't allowing me to function in the right way anymore because I was worrying about it. It was hanging over me. I made the very hasty decision to sell my other investment property, pay down that credit card, and then use the rest of that money from the sale in lieu of income. After covering that debt, I was left with about £120,000. And in my 60s, I was thinking, if I spent £10,000 of that a year, plus the rent I'm getting from my main house, which I used to live in, that's a better existence than I would have had otherwise. Everything made sense on paper. Everything made sense in my mind. While I felt a bit uncomfortable by the fact that I'd already sold one house, now I've sold another. But I didn't think I was going to live till I was 90 anyway, and my wife already got one house out of me, which was good for her. The only thing I didn't take into consideration was the fact that my wife would lose control again. Just one time she went out to what she said was her best friend's birthday. It was just that one time where I allowed her to go by herself, and she was back to her old ways. It was gut-wrenching because she was doing so well, but old habits die hard, as they say. And while I tried my best to help her, what was I meant to do? 6 months of her going out all the time, really getting bad again, really awful stuff, and I felt like I had no choice but to help her again. I said to her, if I pay for you to get help again, if you do it again, that's it. I want what's best for you, I want what's best for me, and I want what's best for both of us. But this is the last time, and she said she understood. That's the thing. When she wasn't partaking, you could see how much she didn't want to, but she couldn't control it. It's an addiction. So I think you need to understand when people are in that space that they don't actually want to be, but sometimes they need to be. So I spent money for her again. That was an amount of money that was meant to be living expenses for a whole year, but I thought it was money well spent. When my wife seemed to be okay again, I just wanted to make sure she stayed that way. And the problem was, I was open to any ideas that she might have to keep herself occupied and out of that life, and we came to an agreement. She said she'd always wanted to open up her own cafe. She wanted to sell coffee and cakes and other things, and perhaps if she did this, she'd be able to focus on that and completely forget about her old life. Stupidly, I invested another big amount of money into that, just for her, thinking this would really be a turning point in her life and in our relationship. That was a lot of money. Way too much money if I think about it. I was stupid, but that's the past, and it is what it is. But one day, I arrived at the shop. She was going all the time, coming back every day, everything was fine. But she didn't come back one day, so I went to see what was going on. She was there, with a few friends, and she was at it again. I was furious, I was heartbroken, but I knew I couldn't be too angry with her when she was in that frame of mind, because it wouldn't help anybody. And when I was angry with her in the morning afterwards, she said she was sorry, she tried her best, and it was just one time. But it was like she was hooked again, and I'm looking at all that money I've spent for her, for this cafe, to keep her out of this. All the times I've spent money for her to go and seek help, and all the things I've done. It appears like I was going to lose everything if I continued. When it was clear, though, that she couldn't be helped, and when I told her that you need to stop and she promised she would and she didn't, then we had some big arguments and fights. Not physical fights, and when she was out one time, coming back completely out of it, when I found out that one of her friends, who was also doing this, she'd actually done more with him than just this, I think that was the moment in time when I realised that you can't help people. You can't help some people anyway, and it was quite clear that she couldn't be helped. Nothing got better between us from there. We tried to persevere. I tried to forget about what she did, but it was clear that I just made some stupid mistakes. I fell in love with what I thought was my version of the perfect girl. I fell in love with how I wanted her to be, but I didn't fall in love with her. I would never have fallen in love with a girl that worked in a bar, who did things like she did, and who had piercings and tattoos. But I fell in love with who I wanted her to be because I thought that she wanted to be who I wanted her to be. And it was a very big fall from grace for me when I understood that I made those stupid mistakes. I was just an idiot for basically ruining my retirement. I did try to persevere with her. I tried and I tried, but whatever I did, it didn't work, and I just couldn't spend more money. Out of all that money from my house, out of everything I invested, everything I'd done, granted, I didn't have none left, but I had about £50,000 of it left. Think about that. Where did all that money go? Straight to her to try to help her. I knew it was over between us and we had to get a divorce. Even when we got a divorce, I found myself feeling sorry for her and I gave her some money, 300,000 baht, saying I hope she'd be okay. She got the house, she got all that out of me, and when we weren't together anymore, that's when the gravity of the situation hit me. I still had my house that I used to live in, still had that bit of money, but I didn't have enough money to live in Thailand anymore. I would get my pension in a few years from that point, but the allure of Thailand had completely gone at that point, and I gave the tenants in my house, my last house, notice that you need to leave soon, and when they moved out, I moved back in, and I've been living there ever since. I can't believe the things I did. I can't believe how one girl allowed me to be this crazy person who did things that he would never have done in a million years before, but I really loved her. Or did I? I loved who I wanted her to be, but she wasn't who I wanted her to be. She was her own person. I helped her as best as I could, and I wouldn't be surprised if she's lost her house already. She probably has. She probably got involved with that life again and used the house as collateral to borrow money, and it went. And if she did that, I can't do anything anyway. My only thing to be thankful for is that I just didn't allow myself to go to zero like so many guys do. I still had about, if I think about everything, half of what I had when I moved to Thailand. And I was able to live in my house. I was able to re-establish myself, and I didn't need to work again. But I was just terrified of going to Thailand, because it only takes one girl to completely drive you crazy that can make you do things that you would never usually do. That was who I was and what I did, and I regret it so much. I often wonder what would have happened if Bangkok didn't change so quickly. I often wonder what would have happened if Bangkok developed at a normal rate of knots. I would never have moved to Chiang Mai. I would have still been living in Bangkok, and perhaps this wouldn't have happened. There's no use thinking about things like that in the slightest. But my biggest mistake was loving that girl, getting married to her, and understanding even from a very early stage that she was involved with things. I knew from that first week that I met her, but I just didn't know how it could take hold of people and grab hold of them and change them and make them do things that they wouldn't usually do. And I did stupid things. Selling one house to buy a house for her. Paying for her to get help and allowing her to go out by herself when the possibilities were so worrying. I'm paying for the mistakes I made today because I'm not in Thailand, but again, all I can point to is the fact that at least I didn't lose absolutely everything like so many people do. But I did lose my ability to stay in Thailand. But I guess that's not as bad as losing my ability to be retired.